Finally, something other than a GPU to review. We're looking at the Lian Li Galahad AIO. There's a new 360 and 240 millimeter closed loop liquid cooler from Lian Li. Lian Li's been working on this for years now. They've shown the Galahad several times at trade shows, and we saw some of the earliest prototype versions probably about 2 years ago now. So this has been a long time in the making. We actually completed our testing for about half of the data in this piece back in August. But then the GPUs and the CPUs happened, and then more GPUs, and then there's more GPUs coming up next week too. So in the time since, we've worked on including both the 240 and the 360, and now we'll be reviewing both of those coolers. Before that, this video is brought to you by the EVGA XR1 capture device. The new EVGA XR1 capture device is OBS certified and doesn't require any drivers. So it's a plug-and-play solution supporting 1080p 60 capture, and importantly for us or overclockers, it can stream BIOS capture without issue and is more reliable when used with an unstable overclock. The capture card has a built-in audio mixer, it can pass through 4K, and includes HDMI in, out, USB Type-C, console party links, and microphone in and out options. Learn more at the link in the description below. One of the biggest changes we have going into this specific cooler review is the addition of our pressure testing. So we do pressure testing for GPU reviews now. We can create a 3D pressure map, sort of a height map of sorts, against a chemically reactive interposer that we use to take the pressure distribution across the IHS. And because Lian Li for AM4 is using just 2 mounting points, it provides an interesting opportunity to see how does that look on an IHS when it's only contacting the mount in 2 locations as opposed to maybe 4 where you get more even distribution. So we'll be looking at that today in addition to all of our standard tests. All right, so the Lian Li Galahad coolers are supposed to be priced at, theoretically, around $120 for the 240 millimeter version, which we have in testing today, and then about $150 for the 360 millimeter version, which puts it close to some of the Corsair 360 mil CLCs. Versus the more value-oriented competitors right now, like the Arctic Liquid Freezer series, the Liquid Freezer 2, 280 for example, should be in the $90 to $100 price range. The 360 should be somewhere in the $110 to $130 price range, depending on when you check it, if you get lucky or not with a restock. So that puts the Arctic cooler in more of a significant value space, whereas the Lian Li cooler is definitely targeting this sort of upscale, high-end branding and a more expensive price class to go with it. Because if you look at the product page for the Lian Li cooler, there are a lot of appearances of words like elegant and understated and design, and talking about aluminum, which is not a cheap thing to strap onto a cooler. And so the markets are a little bit different between the two, but if you're just looking for performance, we'll have a lot of thermal numbers between the coolers. The biggest thing that the Liquid Freezer lacks is RGB LEDs, which, as often as they're made fun of, are an important factor for a lot of people, but it has some interesting advantages or unique features as well. So before we get into this, some testing methodology reminders, because it's been a little while since the cooler reviews. So we have a massive piece on the testing methodology for exactly how we do cooler testing. It's extremely difficult to get cooler numbers to be accurate, especially because you need to factor in things like mounting, remounting, thermal paste application, all these things that can change the numbers. And then of course, ambient temperature control is a big one as well. So we account for all those, and we've factored them all in for our reviews, and you can watch our methodology piece to learn more about how we do that. We also have dummy heaters here that we've used for thermal interface testing, and they can also be used for validation for hierarchical scaling in the charts from one cooler to the next. Since the last cooler review we did, which was probably the EK AIO 360, a very strong performer, versus the Liquid Freezer 2 360, also a strong performer, we've added a whole lot more testing by Mike, credited in the description below. Mike ran about 6 test passes per iteration for each of these coolers. So that's 6 passes on the 3950X at 200 watts for OC, 35 dBA, 6 passes or so, rough plus or minus a couple, for 100% fan speed, and then the same for the 240, and then duplicate that even further for the 3800X testing we do. So there are dozens of test passes now for each of these coolers. He spent well over a week on it. It was probably approaching about maybe a week and a half or so, maybe 2 weeks, to get all the testing done. And there's a lot of good data in here to go through. So let's start out with some of the marketing, the installation and mounting mechanisms, and then go through testing data And of course, as always, noise-normalized thermals will be in here as well as a major piece, but we've also added in our pressure testing. We'll start by going over the claims and marketing so that we can review the product against its own positioning. The Galahad coolers mostly focus on looks for the marketing. Materials point out, quote, machine-detailed aluminum finishes, and, quote, high-end braided tubing, which is somewhat standard now, with one performance call-out in the marketing to high static pressure fans, Lian Li's quote for that. As a note on the braiding specifically, it's typically about $1 per tube bill of materials cost, that is a BOM cost, to get the braiding done, which is actually pretty expensive. That varies based on the manufacturer, but that's the pricing we know for some of the other ones we've worked on in the past. The company has white and black versions of this cooler with 400mm long tubing and a removable cap for each of them. Our removable cap initially was actually lacking the magnet. They sent out a replacement, and this is an issue that was supposed to be resolved after the initial shipments, so you shouldn't run into this at this point in the product's life cycle. The cap is neat, but it's not particularly useful. It's just a way to debrand the Lian Li logo in the event you'd rather not have it in the middle of your system. In terms of marketing on the functional side, Lian Li says it has, quote, extreme cooling capability and, quote, extreme silent. So we'll be testing both of those claims today. Lian Li then spends a lot of time counting its LEDs, because bigger number better, and talking about RGB LED programming. We'll skip over most of this since it's not really something that interests us, but feel free to check the details out on their product pages. Lian Li pushes the looks angle hard in its marketing materials. It uses a lot of flowery language about understated elegance from the aluminum frame on the radiator, which is probably scrap metal from other cases, rotatable lettering, and the pump cap cover once again makes an appearance. Eventually, lower down on the page, there's a discussion of the internals. Lian Li claims it's using a triple chamber solution, which is something we'll look into in a teardown of the cooler shortly. Time to go over some of the materials for the cooler. So we'll talk about internals again in our teardown video separately, but we can start with some of the packaging. A couple of small things we noticed when working on the product. First of all, the manual calls for 4 units of item E, which is a standoff necessary for Intel installation, but our hardware kit only included 3 of these items. Fortunately, we had 2 coolers, so we just merged the kits. The manual also calls for 4 of item D, which is a washer, but included 5. Having an extra seems fine. For other minor fit and finish commentary, we noticed that the Coldplate has small arcing grind marks and some scuff marks on it that could be polished up a bit. These shouldn't really impact performance in any meaningful way though, and ultimately you're not going to see them. For the radiator, it's a fairly standard 20 to 20.2 millimeter thickness for the radiator core and 27.34 for the chassis and the radiator core together. The radiator has a fill port near the tube so that it can be maintained by the user if permeation becomes a problem at some point. You normally wouldn't do this until after a few years of use, but it's nice to have as a way to maintain and keep using the same cooler if the pump stays alive. The rest of the construction includes a rat's nest of RGB cables and a wiring guide that, with some EE symbols, would look like an electrical engineering diagram. There are 2 cables exiting the pump. One is for DC power, and that goes to the board or to a SATA cable, which is optional and included, and the other one goes to RGB control. The RGB LED cable terminates in either an RGB GD5 volt header for the motherboard or to 1/2 of a controller header. If you choose the physical hardware controller, you'll receive input as well from the other side of the cable that connects to the fan LED cables. The fans can connect to a splitter to simplify things and add more cables, but it's still a mess of wires to get it all done. We have to wonder at some point if RGB has gone too far when it requires this much instruction to configure. Mounting hardware for the Galahad series is fairly straightforward, on AM4 at least. On AM4, it takes a cost-saving measure of leveraging the 2 plastic clips included in all AM4 motherboards rather than opting to build a 4-point mount. The benefit is that it's cheaper, at least for Lian Li, and technically it reduces waste. But the downside is potential shortcomings in the contact patch on the IHS, and we'll show that in 3D pressure map images shortly. We can prove where there's weak contact. As another bonus though, it's easy to install. The process for AM4 is as follows. First, you swap out the pre-installed Intel bracket for an AMD bracket on the pump block and housing. Next, you'll use 2 spring-tensioned Phillips head screws and 2 metal clips to grab the plastic clips on the motherboard. After a few tries with this, we found the optimal way to do it. The absolute easiest way to install this cooler was to first hook the clip towards the VRM and then hook the clip towards the PCIe slot. There's much less room to maneuver near the VRM and it's harder to see, so we found it routinely more difficult to clamp on that side last without encountering some kind of annoyance or issue, especially when trying to avoid interfering with paste spread or with chemical interposers. We'd recommend very loosely installing the screws to the clamps rather than lining them up on the mount and then trying to install them then, which is sort of what Lian Li implies it wants you to do in the instructions. 1 or 2 threads of contact is enough to keep the 2 clips loose enough that you can still hook them over the plastic mounts without the difficulty of trying to line it up without a pre-installation at all. Overall, this is mostly a frustration-free design if you take that approach. The total required pieces of hardware for the AM4 mount comes out to 5, not counting the 2 plastic clips that are pre-installed in the motherboard and the 4 screws that are pre-installed in the motherboard holding it in, because you're not going to need to do anything there. There's a bracket on the pump block and housing, 2 metal clips to grab the plastic, and then 2 screws. That's everything. It's a major reduction from the 20-plus piece solution of other coolers, like the Zalman CNPS-20X. For Intel, the installation process involves a lot more hardware. There are 18 total pieces required. It's more reminiscent of older cooler mounts for Intel, and Lian Li has a lot to learn from cooler suppliers like Asetek that use a much simpler but still effective solution. For Intel, you'll need the backplate from Lian Li, 4 screws that pass through the backplate and motherboard but don't thread into anything, they just lock, 4 washers between the backplate and the motherboard, 4 unthreaded plastic standoffs on the socket side but below the mount, the Intel mounting bracket on the pump block and housing, and then 4 threaded Phillips 2 screws on top of that. The rods passing through the backplate are not captive in any way. So this is a frustrating solution to install if the motherboard is already in your case, and because it's a liquid cooler, there's a good chance that's required in instances where you need to get the radiator mounted first. It's not so bad if you can rest the motherboard flat on a table prior to installing it into the case, because then the table will support the screws so they're not falling out all the time. If you must install this while the board is vertical, like in a case, we'd recommend using tape to hold the backplate and maybe the screws to the socket, and then you can remove that tape once everything's threaded together. It won't require 3 hands if you do it that way, so it should be much less frustrating as a user. Lian Li could greatly improve its Intel mounting process by using threads on the socket side to hold the screws captive. That said, given Intel's current positioning, Lian Li's got a little bit of time to figure out that improvement before there's a wide demand for it. We'll start our thermal benchmarks with noise-normalized testing at 200 watts for the heat load, and that's generated by a 16-core CPU. As a reminder, noise-normalized testing is done using the included fans on the cooler, and it's done by adjusting the fan speed down in unison until reaching a fixed 35 dBA at 20 inches distance. This allows us to level the playing field by eliminating one variable, noise, and determining who has the most efficient cooling solution by looking at just the temperature. The immediate challenge we ran into with the Galahad specifically was one of pump whine. At full speed on both of our units, the Galahad emits a high-pitched, audible whine, and this hindered its rank on the noise-normalized charts. Normally, the fans overpower the pump acoustics enough to be the only variable, but we had to adjust the pump speed down to eliminate the whine completely. To get rid of it entirely, we had to go from 12 volts to 8.2, and this is a DC pump, as a reminder. Getting to the chart, here it is. The Galahad 360 ranked about equal to the EK AIO 360 and within run-to-run variants of the Arctic Liquid Freezer 2 360. They're all about the same, and purely from a CPU thermal standpoint, with this 200 watt heat load, you really won't notice a difference. Other factors will matter more, and we'll look at those throughout this review. Idle thermals are also about the same, although Arctic will be advantaged in VRM thermals later. The Galahad 360 is within about 1 degree of the Liquid Freezer 280, so on average the 280 sized radiators remain one of the best balance points for price to performance. It looks like there isn't a Galahad 280 yet, so we can't test it, but it would probably fall in the same range or the same rule where a 280 is the best balance overall. For the Galahad 240, it's ranked lower on the charts and about 4.8 degrees warmer than the Galahad 360. The difference will be minimized on lower power and non-overclocked CPUs, or expanded on higher power systems. The Galahad 240 ranks where the older Asetek Generation 360 CLCs sit, and about 1 degree warmer, roughly within variance or error, than the X62. The AIO 240 is advantaged in this test as compared to the Galahad 240 to the tune of about 2 degrees. That might not be as much the case if we didn't have to contend with so much pump wine on the Galahad. It'd probably rank a little bit higher, but this was an issue on both units, so we don't really have enough data at this point to say whether it's an issue that plagues all of the Galahads or we just happen to have a 100% issue rate on our 2 of 2 units. VRM thermals are next. For these, we're measuring the impact of the cooler to the MOSFET temperatures. As we've discussed in the past, the liquid coolers are mounted in what is functionally a top mount position with airflow directed at the VRM. If we were to front mount the liquid cooler, the VRM wouldn't benefit from the radiator fans like this test setup will. So keep that in mind if you're planning to front mount yours. Numbers will scale differently. Air coolers are tested as is. The Arctic Liquid Freezer series remains at the top of the chart with thanks to its mini fan in the pump block for the VRM. It's half gimmick and half useful. The useful part is obvious. In our reviews of the Arctic Liquid Freezer coolers, we proved that in A/B testing with and without the fan and with 0 other changes, just disconnecting the fan externally, there was a tangible, real benefit. It actually does work, and it does cool down the VRM components. The gimmick part is that it's only going to be useful in scenarios where you're running unsuitable motherboards for the CPU or aggressive overclocks. It doesn't hurt to run the VRM cooler, but a couple degrees here and there when you're already in the 50s or even the 60s doesn't really do a lot for you. So that's the half gimmick aspect. The Galahad 360 at 35 dBA is disadvantaged compared to the AIO at equivalent noise levels. This is because of the lower pressure of the Galahad due to the slower fan speed, which was again a necessity because of the balance between battling the pump whine and the fan noise. It's still within a few degrees of the other results, so it's fine, but it's at a disadvantage. The Galahad 240 is also fine. There's just not as much air getting to the VRM as in some of the other testing, and so it ranks lower. This next benchmark looks at the Coldplate Flatness. We use a high precision needle to check point by point for depth from a known 0 point, and it's all measured in microns. The goal is consistency. We want the box to be as tight together as possible, and outliers, they're okay as long as they remain points on the box and whisker plot as the end and don't contribute too much to expanding the median range. So the box itself should be fairly thin on the chart. That's ideal. The worst we've listed is the A500. That sets the outer bound of a cooler with poor performance or at least poor contact for the Coldplate. The A500 is countered by the best we've tested, which would be split between the Deepcool Assassin 3 for air coolers and the AIO 240. The Lian Li Galahad 360 and 240 are consistent in their measurements. As we measured in concentric circles along the outside and then towards the center, we observed multiple points in succession that plotted in the same depth, which is good. So we saw 7 microns, 7, 7, 7, 8, 9, and so forth. That's what you want to see, is consistency point to point without too much variance. The outliers were limited to a 1 micron measurement and then a 25 or a 28 micron measurement. The median was 9 and then 6 for the 2 coolers. This plot is good overall, and it helps to illustrate where some of the performance comes from in the cooler. Next is to look at a pseudo-color pressure map of the Galahad's mounting contact. Both coolers produced roughly the same data and were very consistent between each one. So we decided to just run with the 360 data to keep this part simple. This is created using a chemically reactive interposer, and then it's scanned into a NIST traceable pressure sensing scanner that we've had calibrated recently. The equipment cost, if you're curious, to create these images was around $8,000. A little more with the interposer cost thrown in there too. We've used it in GPU reviews for about 4 months now, and we're pretty happy with the results, so we're introducing it to CPU coolers. Because this is the first time we're introducing this testing to CPU coolers, we're only going to have Galahad data in the dataset so far. We ran multiple mounts and remounts and ultimately found that the per mount contact was consistent. This final pseudo-color image shows the 3950X on the left and 2 instances of the 3800X on the right. The RAM is indicated towards the bottom of the image. This is very telling as an image, and it's indicative of Lian Li's greatest weak point in the product design. Because the cooler relies on AMD's included plastic clips that come with all motherboards for AM4, there are only 2 points of contact for the cooler, only 2 screws on the left and on the right, there's nothing for distributing pressure across the top and bottom of the CPU IHS. As you can see here, the top and bottom of each CPU between two different CPUs lacks full coverage. Paste will fill these gaps, of course, and that's what it's designed for. But the gaps would be remedied, or at least smaller, with a 4-point mounting solution rather than the cheaper 2-point solution. The 2-point solution reduces cost because the user can leverage included motherboard materials rather than having Lian Li make new ones. This is a nice benefit of reducing waste as well, but the product contact would be improved with a 4-point design. We're not certain how much it would actually impact thermals at the end of the day, because that is what paste is for. It fills those gaps. Clearly, the cooler is already competitive thermally, so it's not strictly needed. But it's one of those easily identifiable weak points in the design, other than the aforementioned pump whine, and we'd be really curious to see if a 4-point contact would improve the results in a way that's worth the extra cost. Moving on to the brute force test, we'll now revisit the 200-watt 16-core heat load with the fans and pumps set to their maximum speeds. The noise level is marked in the cooler name, as we're now unconstraining them and allowing them to run however loud the fans want to run. The Galahad 360 is among the loudest on the chart, overpowering the AIO 360 at 51.4 dBA, and the Arctic Liquid Freezer 2, the 360 version, at 43.2 dBA. And then technically the X72 at 53 dBA, but they're close. Remember too that decibels are logarithmic, so the scale of 53.3 dBA on the Galahad 360 to 43 dBA on the Liquid Freezer 2 is nonlinear. The Galahad 360 tops the chart when fully operational, hitting 46 degrees Celsius steady state load temperature. The EVGA CLC 360 proves itself to be one of the least efficient coolers we've ever tested, with a cacophony of fan noise running still warmer than the Galahad, and similar to the AIO 360. EVGA can partly thank its fan blade design for this. In terms of efficiency, the Arctic Liquid Freezer 360 and the 280 are far ahead here, with significantly lower noise levels for performance that's within about 4 degrees of range. But the Galahad has now become a technical winner for flat-out thermals in this chart, so it does take the crown away for at least one of these tests. As for the Galahad 240 at 50.5 dBA, that's similarly positioned. It's outdoing the Liquid Freezer 2 at 42 dBA, or the AIO 240 at 46.6 dBA. We're basically looking at a chart sorted by decibels at this point, although some outliers prove to be of inefficient design. Again, the CLC 360 or the Kraken X72, which is just an older generation pump design at this point. This next chart shows the time to steady state from our 35 dBA 200-watt test. The time is shown in seconds required to reach eventual steady state. As shown here, liquid coolers hold the entire top of the chart and provide benefit in bursty workloads, which is most workloads, including games, by being able to sustain higher TBB or PB2 frequencies for longer in a situation where the time to max actually matters. The Galahad 360 required 334 seconds to hit steady state, which is within the wider run-to-run variants of the AIO 360. These top 360s are all about the same. The Galahad 240 required 230 seconds, marking it about the same as the AIO 240. Air coolers fill in the chart below that, all at or below 100 seconds. Wrapping it up then, a couple more methodology reminders here at the end, but as always, the goal for testing is about power, not about the CPU. So 3950X, 5950X, whatever you're buying, it doesn't really matter. What matters is how much power is originating from it. There's a little bit of nuance to where the silicon is, but this mostly manifests itself in Intel DT versus HEDT versus AMD HEDT versus AMD DT, desktop for DT. So when you're talking about a 3950X, 5950X, 3800X, 5800X, those are basically going to be the same in terms of the hierarchy of the coolers, and now all you care about is how much power is the product producing. There's going to be some difference as well between a monolithic die approach like Intel DT 10900K, for example, versus AMD chiplet approaches. But within a given processor type, within a given sort of arrangement of the silicon, you'll have a hierarchy that should scale the same as long as you're controlling the power. So if you're looking at a 10900K versus a 10700K, if they're both at 200 watts, the scaling of the hierarchy is going to be about the same between the coolers. And the same is true here for the 5000 series and 3000 series AMD parts. So just a reminder for that. Now, concluding, pricing for this the $120 price point for 240 isn't bad. 150 is about standard right now for these RGB heavy closed loop liquid coolers or AIOs. Arctic is a bit of an outlier here where they're charging pretty far below the average market price for a similarly sized cooler. But the reason they do that is because the cooler is completely lacking in any form of flash or flare at all. There's no RGB LEDs, it doesn't look particularly good, and so that's where that price comes from. And if you care a lot about the looks and the liquid freezer doesn't fit the look you want, there's nothing you can really do about that unless you're gonna invest $100 in fans and LEDs to throw onto it. So the line we would draw is still the best value for strict performance is going to be the Arctic liquid coolers if you can get them at the prices they've typically sold at when they're in stock, which is going to be below the Galahad. If you're looking for whatever reason, the best performance at 100% fan speeds, which it's a little bit abusive on the ears for all of these coolers, but especially for the Galahad, the AIO, EVGA CLC 360 is far and away the worst, the most inefficient too for the noise it produces. But if you're looking for just a chart topper at 100%, Galahad 360 did well. The major issues with the Galahad include pump whine, which can be resolved by bringing down the pump speed. It's not too bad. It doesn't really seem to impact performance all that much. And then the other issue is Intel mounting isn't great, but you probably do that once, so not a huge deal. You do the mount once and you're done with it. AMD mounting is actually really good. It's extremely simple, with the one downside being that because it's a 2-point mount where you've got 2 screws contacting the plastic clips that are included with AMD motherboards, that means you're not getting as even spread across the whole IHS, but clearly the performance was still chart topping or very close to it, depending on which chart you're looking at. So they're doing fine performance-wise. Could be better on the mount, but it's not like it's losing. So it's hard to fault it too hard for that. So then the main 3 we would look at would be the Galahad, the AIO series, and the Liquid Freezer 2. Those are the new coolers on the market that we've tested recently, they're all roughly within the same class of performance, and any one of them at a given radiator size would be a good cooler from a purely functional standpoint, performance standpoint. So then you're picking based on what's in stock, what's the price, and the looks, if you care about that. For air coolers, we have some new ones we want to test. We'll get to them eventually. We've got a couple of Scythe ones in. We have the liquid, the freezer, the tower cooler, not the liquid one. So the freezer and a couple others. We'll work our way towards those over time, but this gets you updated on liquid coolers. We also have a new Corsair liquid cooler in that we need to look at as well, and the 420 version of the Liquid Freezer 2. So those are coming up. The Be Quiet Pure Loop has been tested. We haven't written the data yet. I haven't looked at it. Mike has done all the testing and looked at it, but we'll be going through that over the next couple of weeks. So overall, the Galahad seems to do well. Performance-wise, it does well. It's just a couple of mechanical fit and finish things that could be improved, but most of it's stuff that you encounter once. That pump whine is the biggest downside. So you may just want to go into it prepared to adjust the voltage to the pump, and then that'll take care of that. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you'd like to support us directly. And remember, until December 18th of 2020, we are doing a campaign where we're working with Eden Reforestation projects to plant 10 trees per item purchased on the GN store. If you buy multiple things, then it's 10 times however many things that is trees planted via Eden Reforestation projects. We've worked with them for years, and you can watch our recent news video to learn more about that campaign, or you can donate to them directly too. That's fine with us. That's it for this one. We'll see you all next time.